It's interesting because I feel like, as you mentioned earlier, there can often be misleading messages around debt in the sense of overly stigmatizing it. And I think, if I'm someone who's not super financially literate, I saw what happened in 2008. I see maybe what happened to my own finances as a result of, really high interest student loans. I see perhaps I've gotten myself into trouble with credit cards. And I hear some financial, people out there, some media figures, basically advocating to never have any debt, to never use credit cards, to never get a loan, to never do any of these things. And I see why that would be appealing. I'm someone, I know you're the same, like I love using credit cards to my advantage, for example. But I see how the avoidance of it outright could feel, I think it just gives people more of a sense of security and more of a sense of control. What are some ways that someone who is a little debt phobic could use to start improving their relationship and working toward a place where they're really using things like credit to their advantage?
Well, so honestly, I think a lot of people right now would hop straight into, okay, so you should understand your debt and let's look at those credit card statements and see how much that interest is costing you. But really, I think that we all overlook the emotional aspect that comes along with debt. And because of the messages that we can get in society about finances in general, and especially around debt, we might all have a lot of shame around debt and a lot of resentment around debt. And so if you're looking at your debt as a negative force in your life, then there is very little that you can do to improve that until you improve how you think about your debt. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do as they're reframing is to, first of all, forgive themselves, let loose all of that shame, right? Because there is no need to feel ashamed of your prior financial decisions. You made the best decision that you could in that moment. Because if you could have made a better choice in that moment, you would have. And we all need to accept that we made the best choice that we could have. It's only in hindsight that we now have the knowledge that we're going to start choosing differently. So we can decide to start choosing differently from now going forward. And then the other thing that I tell people to do is to be grateful for whatever it was that their debt bought them. If your debt bought you 2 or 3 years of or 4 years of being able to study and focus on your education without having to work, there is value in that. You are never going to get that opportunity again. I mean, chances are. If your debt bought you a repaired car that you can now drive to work, be thankful for that. If your debt bought you some great nights out with friends, be thankful for that, because those are wonderful memories that you now have. And so, yes, they are impacting you now, but reframing how you think about your debt and thinking of it in a positive light in terms of, this is the value that it brought to my life. I now realize that I don't necessarily want to make those same choices again. Let's course correct is the best place to start.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked about that before on TFT too. I think it's so important to just kind of make peace with whatever the number is that you owe, because I feel like you can lose so much time and energy feeling resentful or bitter or remorseful that you did that. Particularly when it comes, like we hear all the time. It's funny, we have in our rapid fire questions, we have two. One is like your best financial decision and your biggest financial mistake. And 9 times out of 10, one of those two is their student loans. So people either are so happy that they did it or that's like their biggest regret. But I feel like what's interesting is that for most people, even if you can't draw a straight line, like you obviously being an attorney, there's a straight line from law school to your job. There's no ambiguity about you not being able to do what you do without it. But there are many other things that you do that probably aren't a straight line from your degree. And I think for a lot of people who will sit in this chair or that chair and they'll say that, their student loans were their worst decision and that they didn't really lead them to getting a job, I don't feel like you can really say that with confidence, because not only is that degree often an entryway into the door, but it's also that experience set you on the path that led you to this job. And it's highly likely that if you had not done that, you would be somewhere else. Not a worse place, but it's highly unlikely that you'd be exactly the same place you are. So I feel like if you can, to your point, just like accept it, embrace it, and no longer hold on, because I feel like when you feel really bitter and remorseful, you're almost secretly hoping that it will go away. Mm-hmm. And it never will.
Nope.
Make peace.
Yes. And the other thing is that when it comes to our debt, another thing that I encourage people to look at it as is another bill. So the issue with debt is not that you have debt itself, it's that you have a cash flow issue. Because if you have debt, but you have an extra $5,000 every single month that you can do anything you want with, is your debt going to feel like a burden? No. So the issue isn't your debt itself, the issue is the impact that it has on your cash flow. But your debt is not the only thing that has an impact on your cash flow. So there are many different ways that you can manipulate your budget and your cash flow to free up that extra cash so you can do the things that you want to do. You can also go out, and for many of us, we can go out and make more money. And that's one of the things that I did so that my student loans would start to, well, not my student loans, but my debt in general would feel less restrictive to me. I realized that if I just make more money, I will have enough cash flow to be able to meet my debt obligations and still also be able to do things that I enjoy.
You also said something really interesting before we turned the cameras on about how another way to look at debt, and even another way to look at interest, is you're buying yourself time.
Absolutely.
With which you can be doing other things.
Yes, because that's all interest is. It's you get money now, and in return, you agree to pay the person who's lending you that money a convenience fee. Because otherwise, think about it. Let's say you were going to get a $20,000 car, and it would take you 5 years to save up for that car. For 5 years, you don't have a car. You just have $20,000 slowly being added to your account, and who knows what you're doing for a car in those 5 years. Or you can go ahead and borrow to get that car and decide, well, I'm willing to pay $20,000 plus this many dollars for the convenience of having my car right now. And if you think about it, we all pay for convenience. Many of us have Amazon Prime subscriptions. Many of us buy our own clothing rather than make our own clothing. Many of us use, say, city-provided electricity rather than go out and get solar panels so that we can go off the grid and stop paying so much in electricity. We pay for convenience all over the place. And so thinking debt is just another way to do that. You just have to be cautious about how much of it you're taking on, because you have to understand that for the time period it's going to take you to then catch back up, you're going to have to make different choices.
Totally.